Hi there, I'm Jim.
And I'm Claire.
Let's talk teaching. Welcome to Let's Talk Teaching, a podcast from the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology here at Illinois State University. I'm Jim G. Joining me today, once again, Dr. Claire LaMonica, our director. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Jim.
How are you?
I'm great.
Claire, I have to ask you an important question.
What's that?
Do you think I spent enough time preparing for this podcast?
Probably not.
Okay, and the reason it's okay to say that is because a lot of people don't spend enough time working on the tasks at hand, and that's why we're talking today about
time on task.
And what is time on task? We touched on it briefly in a previous episode, but just to refresh everyone's memory.
Yeah, time on task is one of the 7 principles for good practice in undergraduate education. It's actually principle number 5, if anybody cares.
If you're keeping score at home.
If you're keeping score at home. Basically, it refers to the time that our students spend engaging in the learning activities that we've designed for them.
And this is in class and or at home
or wherever. In class or out of class. And I think, it's easier to sort of manage that in-class time because they're right there with us. Mm-hmm. And so we know that occasionally they're going to, they get distracted by a phone or by something that's happening outside the window or something that's going on in the hall or whatever. But we can usually bring them back from that, pretty quickly as long as we're, being engaging and they have something to come back to. So that's good. It's that out-of-class time that we may not spend enough time thinking about.
What does the research show us? What do the numbers show us as far as what students say they're doing outside of class?
Well, actually, we had a director's desk about this a year or so ago, and I'm sure we can link to it on the page.
This is
an
article from our
page. Yes, it was an article from our from the CTLT newsletter. And I wrote that after getting some numbers from the University Assessment Services, which looked at the NESI and the BESI and the FESI, which are all surveys of student engagement and faculty engagement. Send me an email if you want to know what those stand for. And the column had a lot of charts and numbers and things like that in it. But I think the bottom line was that students spend a little more time than we think preparing for class, but not nearly as much as we would like. So I think we need to get beyond just hoping that they spend time thinking about our classes when they're not in them and actually start thinking about that time outside of class as an extension of our class.
Right.
So actually planning things for them to do and holding them accountable for spending time doing those things.
So what are some of these activities that they should be doing outside of class? Because we're talking about, in general terms, thinking about the class, but really...
Right. Well, reading the textbook.
Yeah, number one answer on the board, right?
Number one answer on the board. If we were playing Family Feud, everybody would talk about that. It's really interesting. We as faculty often complain about if they would just read the textbook. And students, when we go out and do midterm chats, and I am sure I am not alone on this, because when I go out and do a midterm chat with a class, and I ask them what they could do as students to promote their own learning, to make a better learning experience, almost always the number 1 or number 2 answer is, oh, well, yeah, we should probably do the reading. And so they know they should do it. We want them to do it. And we get caught up in this vicious cycle where we don't think they did it. So we take class time to lecture over what they should have read, and then they know they don't need to read it because the next time they come to class, we're going to lecture on whatever they should have read.
I had that exact conversation with a faculty member yesterday after a midterm chat, and she was just very forthright and said, I don't feel like they're going to read. And then I said, well, but if you don't set the expectation for them to read, then they're not going to read,
Right.
because they're going to, they have been trained over years. This is something that we inherit from students or that we inherit from our predecessors who have taught these students to some extent. They've gone through school, I think, especially on the college level, a lot of them thinking that they can get away with this.
Well,
It's
and
not,
they can.
And it's not really a matter of getting away with it like, oh, they're going to, oh, I stole this. It's not like they're the Hamburglar or something like that. It's more along the lines of, it's just this natural sort of expectation.
You know what? Students are busy people.
Yeah.
They prioritize.
Mm-hmm.
We're busy people. We prioritize.
Mm-hmm.
So they prioritize the tasks that they have to do that they know they're going to be held accountable for.
Mm-hmm.
So if they have a quiz in one class and they have a paper due in another class and they have a reading assignment for your class, guess which class comes last on the list?
Right.
Unless, and so this is the key,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to provide the expectation that they will not just read, but engage with the reading. And we need to offer them ways to do that. And we need to hold them accountable for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So people who hold students accountable for having completed the reading, I think, find that students are much more likely to have completed the reading.
Right.
And there are a lot of ways to do that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
some people put a little reading quiz on ReggieNet.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably one of the least effective ways, unless the reading quiz is really well done, because
It's usually very
it's just-
superficial stuff. And
yeah, it's superficial stuff.
depending
and
on the
it's-
class, it could be very knowledge level stuff that it's easy for them
Yeah.
to kind of guess.
But you
at.
know what? It's better than nothing.
Yeah.
It's so much better than nothing. And, other people have students, provide reading questions,
Mm-hmm.
things that students should be thinking about while they're reading. Other people have students bring discussion questions to class based on the reading. Back in the way back days of Foundations of Inquiry, there was a really popular, teaching strategy called the ticket in.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of people who were teaching FOI had students bring a ticket in, and it was some evidence, written evidence generally, that they had read the reading, read the assignment, and engaged with that in productive ways.
And just so people know, Foundations of Inquiry was used to be a general education course on campus,
Right.
and the content of that was moved into some different areas.
Yeah, and it's so long gone that most people don't even know about it anymore. So.
Right.
There was a pretty invested community of teachers,
Right.
involved in thinking about that course. And
Yeah.
Tickets In was one of the outcomes of that.
Yeah. So explain to me again quickly, how does the ticket-in system work again?
Well, it was just, usually it was just a piece of paper,
Okay.
but it was something, maybe the students needed to bring a summary of the reading. My favorite thing to do is to have students create a response to the reading. And I will hand out at the beginning of the semester a list of like 15 or 16 different ways to respond to a reading.
Uh-huh.
And then, and they can choose, they can pick any one of those, or they can respond in some different way if they think of it. It might be, create a concept map of the reading, or it might be find one thing in the reading that you disagree with and write about why you disagree with it. I mean, you can come up with tons of those.
And importantly, not basic level questions like, what are the 3 things your textbook author said about this? Necessarily, you want to push them towards doing more thinking.
Higher level thinking.
Thinking. When they're doing this reading, because that's how they're truly engaging with it.
Right. And if it's a really difficult reading, if it's something new, if it's a introductory level class and students are completely new to this this discipline, there's nothing wrong with just asking comprehension questions.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do that. The problem with that is that that's easier for somebody to just get somebody else's answers to the comprehension question. Now, there's some value in just copying somebody else's answers. I mean, it's
that's true.
It's not.
We don't like to advertise that too much.
I wouldn't advertise that at all. But but writing something down, can put it in your put it in your brain a little bit. So.
And it helps sometimes that's enough to fill in the picture that's needed for them to make their own judgments about a topic, or to think critically about
something. Or to
something.
figure out, oh my gosh, I really don't know anything about this. So
right.
I
It is.
probably,
Ooh, there's a paper. There's a
reading.
paper we may write someday. Cheating as formative assessment.
Yeah. Self-assessment. Yeah.
Yeah. Cheating is self-assessment. That could end up burning up the internet. So we've spent a little time talking about reading, which is appropriate, and we'll always come back to reading, of course, as we have our discussions.
Because
in our
that's
podcast.
how we roll.
That's the way it works. Well, but there are other things that students should be on task.
Absolutely. And spending time on. So I think that there's an important distinction to be made between assigning work and making sure that students spend time on task with that work. So, for example, it's very easy to say to a class, you have a paper due in 4 weeks about whatever. And then not to mention that again until, maybe once a week you say, hey, don't forget, you got a paper due in 3 weeks.
Yes.
Don't forget, you got a paper due in 2 weeks. Oh, don't forget, you got a paper due at the end of this week. That's encouraging them to spend time on task, but it's not really demonstrating that they're spending time on task. So,
and it's not providing the structure that you had talked about earlier.
It's not really providing any structure that encourages them to do that. Yeah. So, some people that I've talked to, some people have them turn in parts of the paper in, at various stages. That might work. Some people will have them, for example, at the end of the first week, they'll say, hey, I need a proposal. I need to know what it is you're going to write about, and so on and so forth. And then, I'm going to need, at the end of next week, we're going to, I need you to bring a draft to my office.
Sure.
And, we're going to cancel the class on Friday next week. And instead, everybody's going to stop by my office and show me their draft and ask me questions.
So we're talking about longer term assignments typically. And, that may naturally lend themselves to being broken up into little parts, or at least have little checkpoints, in them. So for example, I've worked with, faculty members in kinesiology or even in business where there's a client involved, where they're doing something for either a real students as a group or even individually are working with either a real or a fictitious client, depending on the circumstances. And so because they're involved in a process, the process itself naturally lends checkpoints.
Right.
Just little touchstones. Hey, how
milestones.
you doing on this?
Some people call them milestones.
Right.
Yeah. Checkpoints, whatever.
And I don't know if there's points. We're getting into grading now, which may be too much into the weeds.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, you can assign points for these things, if you want to, and if you think that will increase student engagement. You can also have that, if they're going to bring something and show it to you, you don't have to grade it. I mean, you have to see that they've done it.
Right.
You have to, it's helpful if you pass your eyes over it or whatever, but it doesn't have to turn into oh my gosh, as a matter of fact, if you're somehow tempted to correct their grammar or their comma usage, don't.
Yeah, right.
Sit on your hands while you look at what they've got.
But tell them that you're not going to do that too. I think it's important to let students know exactly what they can expect, because we also don't want them to be turning in a lot of stuff to you, but they're like, well, you never give me any feedback on this.
Right.
And it's, and you have to specify, this isn't the stuff that you're getting detailed feedback on. That's to come. This is to make sure that you're on time on task.
And you may give feedback on, it depends on, depends on what it is, right?
Yeah, right.
So, if it's a draft, you may give them some feedback, but, if it's a proposal, then the feedback may be, this sounds like a great idea, or, let's talk about this, because I'm not sure this is really going to work. There's been, this has been written to death. So, let's look for something different to write about.
So I have a question for you. When I was thinking about, I did actually think a little bit ahead about our podcast.
Oh, good. I'm so
today.
glad.
How do we give students a good sense of how long it should take to do particular tasks associated with their learning in our course? How do you estimate that?
Well, it's really hard to estimate it because, of course, everything's going to take them longer than it would take you. It's not a bad idea to do an assignment. It's actually a really good idea to do an assignment. We could talk about that some other time, but it won't give you a very accurate idea of how long it's going to take them.
Oh, when you say do an assignment, you mean me as the instructor do
You
my
as the
assignment.
instructor do the assignment. Yeah. Really.
I think that's the reaction you're going to get. Ugh.
Yeah, really.
I'm too busy.
It's a great idea, but yeah, we can talk about it
that
another
is
time. But,
interesting.
over time, you can develop a good sense. So here's what I started doing a couple of years ago. I flipped my Design Your Course workshop in the summer.
Right. Yeah, I remember that.
And took a lot of the stuff that we were doing during our face-to-face, our time together, and asked people to do it in the empty spaces, the time in between. The first time I just guessed, because I had told people, I had said, we're going to spend X number of hours together each week. And I also expect that you will spend X number of hours working on things in between our time together. And so the first time I just guessed. I mean, I guess it was an informed guess. I had done the readings. I was doing the readings. I figured, other people with similar education levels could probably do the readings about the time it took me. But then I asked in ReggieNet. So I used Lesson Builder, and I had the various assignments listed on a Lesson Builder page, on a lesson, I guess it's called. And then at the end, I had it was like a poll, and it said, for the time you spent working on this assignment, was it more than I approximated or less than I approximated? Okay. And I put the approximated time next to the assignment.
Right.
So I said,
okay,
read this chapter in D. Fink's book, and then I put in parentheses 45 minutes.
So I like that because that I think that's helpful, and I think that's something that even students can relate to because
Absolutely.
In our lives nowadays, you go on, you're asked to fill out surveys all the time. Whether it's actual social scientific research or it's something from your bank or something like that. And they will say, and that's good survey design to say how long you think it should only take you 10 minutes to do this.
Yeah. My husband Tom had a political pollster call him last night, and and he usually, hangs up on those people. But the guy said, we're asking you to participate in a survey. It's going to take about 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And Tom was like,
And did he break out the watch and did it take 4 minutes?
I think, it seemed to me that it took a little longer than 4 minutes. I didn't know it was going to take 4 minutes, and I wondered why he was on the phone for so long. But that could have just been because, dinner was waiting or whatever.
So people may approach some of these time limits with a little suspicion anyway. So it may be better to lowball them a little bit the first time around until you get some feedback.
Well, I hoped I was highballing.
Okay.
Actually, because I wanted people to sort of set aside that much time.
I see.
To do the work. And so I tried to sort of overestimate how much time it would actually take them to do it. Because I figured if they set aside 45 minutes and it only took them 30 minutes, they feel, they like me better. What can I say?
They feel like they accomplished something.
Yeah. And if I say it's going to take 45 minutes and it actually takes an hour and a half, they're going to be mad. Or they're only going to spend 45 minutes on it.
Or they won't. Or they'll do it once, but they won't do it again.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So I actually tried to sort of overestimate.
Okay.
And it took some people longer and some people shorter, but I was able to sort of see some trends and then adjust that for the next time that I did the workshop.
Okay. So what else do we need to know about being time on task?
There are some sort of recommended practices that go along with this principle. Okay. So there are things like expecting students to complete assignments promptly. So, holding fast to deadlines. There's a lot of chatter about that. That's another let's talk teaching. So we don't need to go into that. But yes, on the whole, I think we do want to set reasonable deadlines, and we expect students to meet them. Telling students how much time we expect them to spend on the class, I think that's something that belongs in our syllabi. At the very, this class, the successful completion of this class is probably going to require that you spend between 3 and 5 hours a week outside of class working on the learning activities that I'm going to be preparing for you.
And I think that's better than what a lot of, and I have done this before, students are talking about. Either they have an excuse or there's some issue that's come up, or we don't think that they're doing the reading or something, and you say, the university handbook says you're supposed to spend 3 hours for every credit hour that you are, and they all kind of, I won't make the noise, but usually it's right.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna do that, it's probably good to be explicit about it.
Well, and I think be real.
Yeah.
Be real. Tell them how much time you really expect them, and then give them things to do that will actually take about that much time. And maybe, maybe take a stab at saying, okay, you need to read chapter 6 and you need to create 3 discussion questions based on the chapter. And this is probably going to take you about an hour and a half. And that can be in your, in your course schedule or whatever that information can be. So, asking students to rehearse in class, presentations or I mean, it's really, there's just lots of things that you can do, lots of ways to encourage them. But the big thing is going to be designing things that are engaging, holding people accountable for doing them, and then, moving on. Don't get sucked into that, they didn't do the reading, I'm going to have to lecture over the chapter. Don't let yourself get sucked into that. Time in class should be value added. So once you are pretty certain that you've assigned them to do the reading, you've held them accountable in some way for doing that reading, march on. Do the next thing. And, a really good thing to do in class is to engage them in tasks that require what they should have learned from the reading.
To make it a building, an iterative process, or learning is an iterative experience.
Yeah. So that's sort of flipping. Someday we should talk about flipping. I seem to keep mentioning that today.
Yeah, we did talk about that a lot today, and I think that is a good one. And that's a big topic in and of itself, I know. So one final very quick question when we're talking about set expectations and then hold them to those expectations. I just want to know what your thoughts are on this. I have found it a little valuable to have some sort of an exam early on. Sometimes I've done, we actually talked about this a few days ago off mic. I started giving them the final exam the first day to see to use it as a sort of formative assessment or at least a pre-test sort of thing. Have you worked with anything like that, or is that a?
Well, I tell you something that I think is really helpful is any kind of prior knowledge probe.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that giving the final exam on the first day, that tells you sort of what they already know, and it lets you know whether there are things that you can spend less time on than you thought you might need to, or things you're going to need to spend more time than you thought you would. But there are lots of prior knowledge probes out there. There's lots of lots of strategies for doing that. And I think that that's always, it's, if students need to know their stuff they don't know.
Yes.
And, specifically in relation to your course.
Yeah.
And that keeps them engaged.
Yeah. And that may help you adjust assignments that you're expecting them to do, for example, outside of the classroom.
Right.
It's probably harder to keep students on task when the task at hand is something they think is to them review, or something that they don't feel they need to spend as much time on.
And if you do a prior knowledge probe and you discover that, almost everybody knows this stuff, there's a couple who don't, then you may be able to design some out-of-class learning experiences for those people to kind of catch up.
Oh, that's a good idea, yeah.
And then, then you can kind of move on. You don't have to pull everybody else back and say, okay, well, there's 3 people in this class of 30 who don't know this, so we're going to spend a week talking about it.
Well, Claire, thank you so much. Some great ideas and some stuff to think about, and I'm sure we'll touch on this and the 6 other principles for good practice in undergraduate education at some other point. So thanks again.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
And that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Let's Talk Teaching. You can find out more about our podcast on our website. That's ctlt.illinoisstate.edu. Click on the podcast link at the top of the page. You'll find a link to this particular show's notes. For Claire LaMonica and everyone here at the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology, I'm Jim G. Until we talk again, happy teaching.